Greetings, people with an interest in literature. Welcome to my presentation on the seven basic plots theory. This theory comes from a 2004 book published by Christopher Booker. It builds on a much older tradition of people observing that many different stories, even when they are separated by different cultures, different regions, and hundreds or thousands of years, often have the same types of plots and the same characters that recur. And you might hear this, the same subject being discussed as tropes or archetypes. But yes, this is articulated as there are seven types of story, and most stories will fall into one of these. That's in particular, that's Christopher Booker's take. Um, it is a literary theory, and every once in a while, my students want to treat a literary theory like a scientific hypothesis, and the idea is to try to disprove it. I think most of the conversation that I want to have it isn't necessarily based on whether Christopher Booker was right or not, but when we look through this lens, does it lead to productive conversations about literature? I think it often does, and I think a stimulating conversation to have. Sometimes even an argument is, where will you put this work of literature? Do you think is it a tragedy, or is it a tale of overcoming the monster? Can often be like a good way to kick off a literary conversation. If you're ever writing for me this semester and don't quite know what to talk about in one of your readers' responses, you can always go back to Christopher Booker and say, I think this tale is a quest, and here's what quest stuff it has or does. So these are Booker's seven categories of stories: the quest, rags to riches, overcoming the monster, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. I don't think that even Booker says that every piece of literature ever produced is going to fall neatly into one and only one of these categories. Certainly, there are stories that have elements of multiple, multiple categories in them. And even Booker himself mentioned that there are a couple of other, it may not be limited to seven, that there are a couple of other story types, mystery and rebellion, which we are just not going to get into in this video because he considered them of lesser importance, and I do too. So there is, even though these stories are going to fit into seven different categories, there is a certain amount of unifying themes that come through these stories. So Booker would describe almost all stories, whichever category they fall into, as going through a few stages. And the first would be the anticipation stage, where you get a glimpse of what normal life is like. You get to see the protagonists living their normal existence before something will come along, some kind of call to adventure that is going to disturb their normal life and make it so that they have to leave their comfort zone and do and undertake whatever the story is going to be about. And so here we have a picture of Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit, just comfortably smoking in front of his house before his adventures start. He was quite content, to live his little suburban life before those 13 dwarves and a wizard showed up at his door and told him to go, on this long quest with dragons and orcs and stuff. And then also at the in the Wizard of Oz, right, you get a glimpse of Dorothy's regular life on a farm in Kansas before the tornado arrives to turn everything upside down, kind of literally. Next, our heroes are going to experience a dream stage, and the dream stage just means it's a phase of the story in which the characters are making some progress. They're experiencing some early successes. So to continue with the Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy first lands in Oz, that's certainly very disturbing. But right away she starts making some allies: Glinda the Good Witch, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion. She learns the road that she needs to take to get to the Wizard of Oz, and she's on it, literally making progress along her quest. So that's what the dream stage is like. Things are moving in a positive direction. On screen, I have a frame from Oliver Stone's movie The Doors, which is a biopic of the rock band The Doors, and I probably could have used any shot from any rock and roll band movie, because what seems to be a very common trend when we tell the stories of musicians is we talk about their rise to greatness. There's this phase where the albums are selling and people are buying tickets to their concerts, and they have lots of fans and the money is rolling in. And so yeah, all of these rockers would go through a dream stage, and then it would usually that's what happens before we get to the part of the story where there's betrayal among the bandmates, or drug addiction or some kind of thing like that starts to create some complications in this story. And that's not only in every movie about a musician that I can think of, but also in some classic rock songs like Shooting Star by Bad Company and Into the Great Wide Open by Tom Petty. When the dream is over, we get into the frustration stage. And in the frustration stage, any sort of progress stops or grinds to a crawl. Sometimes there are setbacks that actually erase the progress that our main character might have made in the dream stage. Here, pictured is a scene from Coming to America, in which Eddie Murphy is an African prince, and he and his best friend Arsenio Hall have come to America to find a bride. But at this point, what we're looking at here, they have not found a bride. They are living in a slum. They are working at a knockoff version of McDonald's called McDowell's Restaurant, and yeah, there no progress is being made, and it is frustrating for our main characters. A good example of how the dream phase can give way to the frustration phase is in Star Wars: A New Hope. That is the first Star Wars movie in order of their releases, and in this scene, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Chewbacca, not pictured, have come to the Death Star to rescue Princess Leia Organa. And it's gone well. I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi died. That wasn't great, but generally speaking, they've done what they came for. They did manage to get Princess Leia out of her cell, and they all managed to sneak back to the Millennium Falcon, and they managed to fly away from the Death Star without the tractor beam re-engaging. And so they feel great about their progress, and we, the audience, feel great about their progress until they cut back to the command center of the Death Star, and one Imperial officer says, "Should we blow them out of the sky, sir?" And the other officer says, "No, don't shoot them. We're going to track them back home." And then we, the audience, realize, oh no, things are not going as well as we had just thought they were. They're actually, about to take a turn for the worse. And it only gets worse because the frustration stage is followed by the nightmare stage, when the sort of like the foreboding and the setbacks and the obstacles of the frustration phase give way to, or stage, give way to real terror, imminent doom, hopeless, a seemingly hopeless situation in the nightmare stage. And the example that I've given here is Lady Macbeth, who very famously in the play Macbeth goes quite mad at the height of her plot to kill the King of Scotland, after the King of Scotland has already been murdered, and she famously she hallucinates that she has blood on her hands that she can never wash off. Um, so the final stage of all of these stories, according to Booker, is the resolution phase stage, and the resolution stage is the stage in which things get resolved. And I wish I could be more specific with you than that, but the theory is not any more specific than that, because different stories get resolved in different ways. What I've got on the screen here is the marriage of Robin Hood and Maid Marian in the Disney version of Robin Hood, and this is actually a very common and popular way to resolve a lot of different stories, particularly comedies, in which you will see a marriage, sometimes a childbirth, and this is is a pretty popular note to end a story on, because you are sending the message to your audience. Even if there was some darkness in the story, some destruction and death, life is going on. Life is starting anew, and both marriage and childbirth sort of symbolize that renewal, which is often a note that authors like to hit at the end of the story. But It would not be accurate to say that the resolution of the story is where people get their happily ever after, because, of course, there are many stories that do not end on a note of happily ever after. King Arthur dies at the end of his story, at least the Le Morte d'Arthur, the famous Thomas Malory version. And At the end of Goodfellas, Ray Liotta's character, he isn't dead, but he's imprisoned in the suburbs because he ratted out the mafia, and now he has to live the life of a regular non-gangster schlub like the rest of us. And it ends on a very negative note. His character is not fulfilled or satisfied. Not the same thing as happily ever after, but it is going to resolve whatever conflict we were facing down in the nightmare stage. Let's go ahead and start talking about those actual 7 categories into which, according to Booker, most stories can fit. The first one I want to talk about is overcoming the monster. I want to start with this one because it is the simplest story type. Whatever kind of tranquility or normalcy we had during the anticipation phase of this story is going to be disrupted by a monster. And in some cases, the monster is just an absolutely literal monster, like here in the movie Jaws. A peaceful seaside resort town is terrorized by the arrival of a giant, terrifying shark, and that conflict is only going to be resolved when somebody kills this shark. And that is a storyline that goes back, pretty much to the beginning of literature, because characters like Gilgamesh and Hercules. And Thor, their stories often revolve around there's a giant terrifying monster, and you need to kill it or subdue it or neutralize the threat that it poses. So yeah, sometimes overcoming the monster stories, the monster literally is a big scary thing with teeth and claws. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the monster is a little more abstract. So here we've got a picture from the Hunger Games, and in the Hunger Games, the monster that Katniss Everdeen must overcome is not really the other competitors in the Hunger Games. It's the system. It's the oppressive, brutal, greedy, cruel system that they have in the capital and the districts that that create these circumstances where the poor kids have to shoot each other with arrows in this public spectacle. That society is the monster, and that society has to be overthrown. And so, yes, society as a monster does come up in a lot of overcoming the monster movies. Nazi Germany, World War II Germany is a very popular subject to make a movie about. And those tend to be overcoming the monster. All those old, those grainy black and white movies, war movies that your grandpa loved, those were probably all overcoming the monster movies about the Nazi society, the Nazi government in World War II. And also movies like Schindler's List, even though they don't use violence to fight against the Nazis, still, the Nazis are the monster, and overcoming them just means, getting all of those potential Holocaust victims to safety under the nose of the monster, without really like defeating it in battle. But I would classify all of those movies still as overcoming the monster. Next, let's talk about The Quest. The quest is characterized by going on a long journey in pursuit of some goal and overcoming lots of obstacles while on that journey, meeting some allies on that journey. These are the traits that characterize a quest. Pictured here, I have Indiana Jones. Every single Indiana Jones movie is a quest. And every single Indiana Jones movie features a very common element of quest, which is called a MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is not really part of Christopher Booker's theory. I believe that it was Alfred Hitchcock who popularized the term MacGuffin. And what MacGuffin means is just it is an object, and that object becomes an integral part of the plot because all of the characters involved in that plot want to get the object. And so the plot becomes competition over who will get to have the object, or else it becomes a story about overcoming obstacle after obstacle until you can finally place your hands upon the desirable object. And so on the screen right now, the Maltese Falcon, the great classic pulp story about everybody trying to get their hands on this falcon, on this art piece. And then the Holy Grail, once again, Arthurian literature, the greatest prize in Arthurian literature. Only the purest, most holy and Christian knight could lay his hands on the Holy Grail, which was apparently the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, although that is not referenced in the Bible at all. That's a detail that was added later. Other quest stories. Rat Race is a comedy, I want to say from the early 2000s, in which $1 million is or maybe a few $1 million is locked inside a locker at a train station, and all of the characters are competing over trying to get the key to that locker, and then be the first person to race across the country to that train station and open that locker and get whatever it is that's inside it. Whatever great thing is inside it. Pulp Fiction is a quest. Well, I'm not sure that Pulp Fiction is a quest movie, but it does have a great MacGuffin in the form of that mysterious briefcase that everybody wants to get their hands on, but they never really quite explain to the audience what was inside it. That's titillating. I think Tarantino is kind of like nodding at the institution of a MacGuffin, because the whole point is like, it doesn't matter what's inside it. None of this stuff matters. What does the Holy Grail do? It doesn't really matter. The point for the story, it just matters that everybody wants to get their hands on it. The Golden Fleece, the quest for the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts, is a great quest story from ancient Greece that, again, of course, features a MacGuffin in the form of the Golden Fleece. And maybe the best example of all, the Lord of the Rings movies are a quest, but they're kind of interesting because they do have a MacGuffin. The MacGuffin being the One Ring to rule them all. But instead of trying to obtain the MacGuffin, Frodo wants to be rid of it. He wants to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. But all of these stories involve, travels and, meeting new people. Who's going to turn out to be a friend? Who's going to turn out to be a foe? What are going to be the obstacles we have to overcome before we can, complete that quest? Those are the consistent features of this type of story. Voyage and Return. Voyage and Return is pretty similar to the quest, because once again it's going to involve a long journey. Quite likely that, like the quest, a lot of the action of the journey is going to be what obstacles will we have to overcome, what friends will we meet, what enemies will we have to contend with on our way to the goal. But what differentiates Voyage and Return from the quest is that the point of Voyage and Return is to go home. And so any story in which, how will we find our way home, it generally is going to fall into this category. So on screen, of course, the most famous of all, the original Voyage and Return story. Is it the original? I don't know. It's pretty dang old, though. The Odyssey by Homer. Of course, Homer wants to return to Ithaca, but the Mediterranean Sea is full of cyclopses and witches, and just every obstacle that you can think of. Finding Nemo is a voyage home. Star Trek Voyager is a voyage home. Most of the Star Trek series are, what are they? Mostly quests. But Star Trek Voyager is specifically, the challenge is getting home. Alice in Wonderland, Voyage and Return. I go to a strange place and I find my way home. The Wizard of Oz. Can't stop talking about it. It is most certainly a Voyage and Return story. This also brings up a kind of interesting feature of the Voyage and Return archetype, because Voyage and Return stories tend to end in one of two different ways. In some Voyage and Return stories, which includes The Wizard of Oz, at the beginning of this story, Dorothy is actually expressing that she's not totally satisfied with her life in Kansas. It's a little boring, it's a little slow paced, and she wants to go, somewhere over the rainbow where life is just more exciting, more vivid, maybe fewer cows. I don't know. But then she goes to this very exciting, vivid place. In the original movie, if you haven't seen it, Kansas is shot in black and white, and Oz is shot in color. And this is back in the early days, of making color movies. So it must have really seemed quite miraculous, when Dorothy, black and white Dorothy, wakes up in full color Oz. But eventually, what she realizes is that she wants to be back in Kansas, and she does eventually return to Kansas. And when she returns to Kansas, her attitude has changed because she realizes, that Kansas is not boring or small. That Kansas, that there's famously no place like home, and so she's very, she gains a new appreciation for home because she had to fight to regain it, right? However, there is another strain of story that often also follows the voyage and return story, which is where somebody is perfectly comfortable being at home, and then does their voyage and return, and then afterwards, when it is completed, because the resolution phase to every voyage and return story is the return. They do get back home. But some people, when they get back home, they realize, hey, I might have spent this entire novel, this entire movie or play longing to be back home, but now that I'm here, I don't belong here anymore. I have changed and I have grown during the course of these adventures, and this just doesn't, it just doesn't contain me. It doesn't fulfill me anymore, and I can't, go back where I came from. And so that is the case. Actually, I did say that the Lord of the Rings is more of a quest than a voyage home, but Frodo does go home and realize that he doesn't belong in Hobbiton anymore. He ends up having to sail off to the mystical land of the elves. More recently, in the Barbie movie, once Barbie has gone to the real world, this is the Margot Robbie version of Barbie. Once she has gone to the real world, she spends all her time saying, "Oh, I just want to resolve some stuff and then return to my life in perfect plastic Barbie land." But once she has actually resolved all the problems of the movie, she realizes that she does not want to dwell in perfect plastic Barbie land anymore, and so she comes to dwell in the real world. And so, yeah, two possible endings for a voyage and return story. I realize how much I appreciate my home, and then on the other hand, I attain the journey home that I sought, and then am surprised to realize that I don't fit here anymore. Okay, so for this next one, I gotta clear up a misconception because sometimes in life there is the language that everybody uses, and then there's the language of the of the academic world, and so a comedy does not mean a story that is very funny and has a lot of jokes in it. I guess I should say, in a literary sense, when we're talking about the literary structure of a story, the definition of a comedy is not it makes a lot of jokes. And I think that, even though regular people who aren't English professors usually do sort of just use comedy to mean anything that's funny, in a sense, I think we do have this idea that, like, there's a difference between making lots of jokes and having a comedic plot structure, because there are movies like, for example, pretty much any one of the Marvel Comics superheroes movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, those movies make lots of jokes. And I don't think that they would be classified as comedies. Even some of them, Guardians of the Galaxy, I think really leaned into the humorous aspect, and I don't think any of them get classified as comedies. They're mostly overcoming the monster stories or quests, and even people who aren't really thinking about literature probably do not characterize the Marvel superheroes movies as being comedies, no matter how many jokes they do in those movies. So what actually makes a comedy? Oh, the picture that we're looking at right now, A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. I'll get back to it. So what actually makes a comedy is that confusion drives people away from each other, but they get through their confusion and eventually they reunite. And that's the plot structure that goes along with most comedies. as it happens, when you tell a story about people being separated by confusion and misunderstandings, then ultimately repairing the relationships, I don't know why, but that really does lend itself as a good platform for lots of jokes, you know. So you do tend to get movies that are humorous, but also follow that plot structure. And so there are a lot of movies that are comedies in both the kind of classic literary sense, and they are also comedies in the sense that they're chock full of jokes, and you have a lot of opportunities to laugh, as this plot unfolds. People use the term romantic comedy, and that term does make a lot of sense because romantic comedies are definitely comedies. In every romantic comedy that I'm aware of, you have two people who the audience knows, you know, they should be together. They're bound to be together, but there's some kind of misunderstanding between them, and they separate. Some forces are keeping them apart. And as the movie nears its resolution, the people will realize that their misunderstanding was only a misunderstanding, and that they get past it. They put aside whatever kind of disagreements were holding them apart. You saw me kissing another girl, but no, that wasn't even another girl. I'm taking a CPR class, and I was resuscitating a mannequin with a wig. So I never was kissing another girl, so we can go on with our relationship, and we come back together again. That would be a romantic comedy would usually have a very small community, just two people, but the key thing is that they separate because of a misunderstanding. They get over their misunderstanding. They come back together again. The picture on your screen is from Pop Star, Never Stop, Never Stopping. And in this movie, it is about, I guess, sort of like an R&B kind of boy band group. And one of the members of this boy band becomes more popular than the other two, and so he ditches them to become a solo act. And eventually he and the other two, of course, resent him for dumping them, and so there's a lot of bad feelings between all three of these musicians. But then in the end, they all realize that they were better together, better artistically, better as people, better as friends together, and they do, reunite in that sort of classic comedic structure. And I'm going to also mention the movie Superbad, in which the two main characters have a falling out because one of these characters is going to go to a good college. They're high school best pals, and one of these characters is going to go off to a good college, and the other character is I don't know if he's not going to college. He's going to work in the. I forgot what happened to the other character, but he's not making that same step in his life, and as a result, the character who isn't going to the good college feels like he's been dumped by his friend, and they have that falling out, which is ultimately resolved by a good heart to heart between these two guys, and they resolve that even if they do get different educations and find themselves in different places, they're never not going to be friends. Forgive the double negative there. And I did mention A Midsummer Night's Dream, one of Shakespeare's funniest and most accessible plays. In The Midsummer Night's Dream, there are three different sets of lovers, and we, the audience, know that they should be together, but wandering around in the woods, at night, they get there's misunderstandings, there's jealousy, there's fog, there's fairy magic, there's disguises, all sorts of things just really, confuse these people and make them stray away from their lovers. But before the night is over, all of that stuff gets resolved, and every one of these three lovers has gotten paired back up together with the person they're supposed to be with. And so this is going to end on a positive note. I think by definition that comedy is going to end on a positive note. The reuniting of people who have been separated, is supposed to make us in the audience feel good. And if I'm going to talk about comedy, of course I'm going to talk about tragedy. Tragedy, just like comedy doesn't really come down to it makes you laugh. Tragedy doesn't really come down to it makes you feel sad. There's more to a tragedy in the literary sense than just telling a sad story. So, for example, if a boa constrictor ate your cat, that is sad. It's not a tragedy. Because what it is missing is this element of a tragedy which the ancient Greeks would have called hamartia, which is the tragic flaw or the mistake that the main character makes, and it's this, and it it's usually not something that makes them like a bad person, but there is this one issue that that's either like a function of their personality, or else it is just a bad call that they make at some decision. But at that point, it is going to set up a series of events that are going to end up making them miserable, sometimes destroying them, sometimes actually resulting in their deaths. But a key part of a tragedy is that in some way, I'm not going to blame the victim and say that the victims of tragedies deserve it, but there is something in their own behavior that precipitates their downfall. So on the screen right now is a picture of Fan Li and some ancient Chinese money. Fan Li had three sons. His first son was born when Fan Li was not very successful economically, and he was born into a relatively poor family. But by the time he had that third son, Fan Li had really hit it big, and that third son had the privilege of growing up very wealthy. The second son, I guess he was born somewhere in between, but the key point for this story is that the second son gets arrested and, in fact, is on death row when Fan Li hears about this. And so Fan Li goes to his youngest son and says, I want you to take this big sack of money and bribe the court official to let your middle brother out of jail. And then the first brother, the eldest brother, hears about this and is like, Dad, why are you sending my baby brother on this super important mission? It's kind of like an insult to me that you bypassed me and you went with my baby brother. You can trust me, to bribe this court official and get my younger brother, the middle brother, out of jail. And Fan Li says, okay, sorry about that, eldest son. You can go ahead and have this mission. Here's a big sack of money. Go and bribe that court official. And the oldest son goes to get his little brother out of jail, but without going into all the little details, he sort of tries to haggle on the price. He tries to win back some of that money, and as a result, the court official who was initially willing to release the second brother recaptures him and executes him, and the eldest brother has to come back and say, Dad, I tried to bail out, I tried to bribe my younger brother's way out of jail, and I screwed up because I tried to haggle on the price, and now my brother, your son, has been executed. And Fan Li says, well, of course, I should have known that was going to happen. The reason I chose your younger brother is because he grew up rich and he would have no problem with throwing away a big bag of money. But because you grew up struggling, you would have the instinct, to try to save a few yuan or whatever they called their currency back then. So that's a sad story because Fan Li lost his son, and that young man had to die. But it's somebody's fault. You might say that the story is a tragedy and the hamartia was the fault of the eldest son, because the eldest son shouldn't have tried to get his money back after bribing that court official, which is fair, but I think that the hamartia might also be with Fan Li himself, because Fan Li could have not given in to his eldest son's demands if he knew that this was going to go wrong. Or he could have just told his son more explicitly, listen, do not try to save any money. I've given you the amount of money. I want you to give every single cent or yuan to the court official. And Fan Li didn't do either of those things. And so maybe the hamartia is on him. And of course, the Chinese wouldn't have used the word hamartia. Maybe they had their own word for it. Hamartia is the Greek word for tragedy, and of course Greeks are famous for their tragedies. That slide that you were looking at a moment ago, this was from a production of Oedipus Rex, which is a pretty dang sad story, which I won't get into right now. The next story type is rags to riches. This one's also a pretty easy one to understand because in many rags to riches stories, all you're really seeing is a person who starts the story very materially poor, having some great economic successes and winding up a wealthy and powerful person, maybe with some social status to boot. And so here, of course, we have Slumdog Millionaire. That's the plot of Slumdog Millionaire. That's also the plot of Trading Places, another great Eddie Murphy movie from the 80s. Eddie Murphy, so good in the 80s. And Brewster's Millions. All of these are movies about poor guys getting rich. In a lot of cases, the conflict of rags to riches, yeah, there's overcoming poverty, but there's often some kind of like crisis point in in a rags to riches movie. There's often some kind of crisis point where the main character has to choose between his wealth and being a decent human being, being compassionate or prioritizing other people over his own wealth. And Generally speaking, in a rags to riches story, the way that gets resolved is that our main character does choose to do the decent thing and not just chase that money bag, but does the right thing and chooses humans over money. But then through whatever plot contrivance you want, in a lot of cases they wind up with their money anyway. So they often wind up these stories having made the right decision. They chose to be a good person. They probably gained some wisdom or personal growth during that conflict. And they also, generally speaking, still get their big stack of money. So yeah, this tends to be a happy ending, sort of story type. And of course, riches often refers to money, right? That's its obvious connotation. But there are other stories that do the rags to riches plotline, but they don't really focus so much on money. Other kinds of riches could be social status or fame. A story in which an unpopular person becomes popular. I think there's certainly stories like I guess Revenge of the Nerds from the 1980s is about a bunch of like unpopular dorks who become like the kings of their college campus and vanquish all the cool, rich, athletic frat guys. So yeah, I could see that as being a rags to riches story. People who are unlucky in love, finding romantic success. That could also be a form of rags to riches. One very popular style of doing a rags to riches story may involve money minimally or not at all. You'll sometimes see stories about athletes who are losers, athletes, where there's a very low expectation surrounding them, who go on to be champions. And, that is the plot of the first Rocky movie, maybe the first two Rocky movies, that the Rocky Balboa character is sort of like he's nobody's favorite, nobody likes his odds, but he manages to go 15 rounds with the champ in the first movie and actually beat him in the second movie. And those are rags to riches stories. I will mention that only the first two Rocky movies are rags to riches stories, because by the time we're at the end of that second Rocky movie, Rocky is already a superstar and I guess probably a millionaire, and so that the rags to riches isn't really the issue anymore. And then when you start to get into the subsequent Rocky movies, it's more about overcoming the monster because they introduce a new boxer like Mr. T or Dolph Lundgren, and this other boxer, this rival boxer, will be really dangerous and also like really mean, really bad person. And so it's not so much about going from a nobody bum to being a superstar. Now it's about triumphing over a monster. Like those other two boxers. Also on the screen right now, there's a scene from Ladybugs, and Ladybugs is almost the same story as Rocky, but instead of a professional boxer, it is a little league girls soccer team. And there are lots of movies like this that that do that plot with children's sports. This team, is made of a bunch of like misfits and chumps, and they're uncoordinated and they aren't athletic, and the other teams have so many more privileges and higher social status, but our team of lovable losers is going to go all the way and take the championship. And there's a lot of movies that do that. The Mighty Ducks and the Bad News Bears, tons of movies follow that that plot line. So, which is another form of rags to riches. Rebirth is the seventh and final plot that Chris Booker wants us to think about. Rebirth, so you might have, when you hear the word rebirth, the first story that you think of might be the story of Jesus, who is crucified but comes back from the dead. And that certainly is a rebirth. It's not usually the example I like to give when I'm talking about what a rebirth story is like, because that's actually a bit of an odd story. Most of the protagonists of rebirth stories don't literally die and come back from the dead, because most stories are about mortals, and mortals, generally speaking, don't do that. So more often than you see a character literally die and return from the dead, what you're going to see in a rebirth story is somebody who experiences a great transformation. Who becomes like a new person, not in a literal sense, but in the sense of like becoming enlightened and shedding some bad qualities. In most cases, rebirth is also a positive story. When a person, you might say that the person who dies is the old bad version of me, and the person who is reborn is a new version of me who is wiser, more compassionate, something along those lines. So the example that I've given you here is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And in this story, famously, Ebenezer Scrooge goes from being a bitter, mean, stingy, greedy miser, who then has these harrowing experiences, is really kind of like, terrorized, and then sort of touched tenderly, and then terrorized again by visits from four ghosts. That is the ghost of Jacob Marley and the spirits of Christmas past, present, and future. And by the time he gets to the end of this harrowing experience, he changes. He's a different person, you might say, and he becomes loving and compassionate towards other people, and really valuing, the company of other people, and wanting to share his wealth with other people. So that's Ebenezer Scrooge's rebirth, and that type of reinvention of the person is much more common than actually coming back from the dead in a rebirth story. Here are three examples of rebirth stories from the late 20th century. How Stella Got Her Groove Back is the tale of a woman, single mom in her mid 40s, after a messy divorce. The part of Stella that was vulnerable enough and open enough to fall in love had withered, and you might say died. But she went to the Caribbean, and rediscovered that part of herself, and the part of Stella, the Stella who could love, is reborn. So yeah, of course, not a literal death, but a transformation. 28 Days is a story about a woman with a drug problem, a drug and alcohol problem, who realizes that she's on a real self-destructive path and has got to change her life. And I think it illustrates this point well, because you might say, well, look, that's not really a rebirth. That's just changing some habits. Certainly this movie makes the case that there's more to it than that. In fact, for example, Sandra Bullock's character has to burn a lot of bridges. She has to cut people out of her life because they were friends with alcoholic Sandra Bullock, and healthy Sandra Bullock can't have any elements of that same life that alcoholic and drug addicted Sandra Bullock had. I'm talking about her character. I'm not talking about the woman, the actress at this point. Sorry about that, Sandra Bullock. But anyway, so in effect, she has to sort of destroy her old life, her old existence, to have this this new healthy life that she wants for herself. And I think in that way, it's a rebirth story. And then finally, to end on a lighthearted note, when a scientist is murdered and his body is dumped in the swamp itself, aided by the chemicals he was brewing, the swamp itself transforms this dead man's body into a superheroic creature composed of algae and muck, and bullets will pass right through him, because he's all squidgy. And this is the origin story of DC's Swamp Thing. And that, of course, is a rebirth story in which the main character does actually die. So sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Those were the 7 basic plots. So I would love to continue this conversation. What is your favorite type of story? What's your favorite novel or movie, and into which category would you want to place it? Or is it so complex that your favorite story has got to straddle two or three of these things? Or would you like to argue with any of the examples that I gave and say, "Hey, I don't think A Midsummer Night's Dream is really a comedy. I think it's really more of a rebirth story." By all means, everything that you are hearing here is just my interpretation of somebody else's theory. So there's a lot of room for discussion, which is, I think, what makes the theory useful to begin with. It's a platform for having an interesting and enlightening conversation about literature. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it sparks a good conversation, and I hope to be there when you have it. I'll see you later.